All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. This is a, whoops, clearly the thing works. All right. This is funny. Usually I don't need a mic, but this will help everybody else. So my name is Blake Pustai. I am a QA engineer at Tableau, specifically on our sustaining team. So my team's job is to make sure all the bug fixes get fixed and we don't create new ones in the process. And I've been at Tableau about 6 years. Spent the previous 4 as the product manager for server administration. So this whole area is fairly near and dear to my heart. Kevin?
All right.
Go ahead.
So hi, I'm Kevin Holbert. I'm a deployment advisor with Tableau, which is someone that helps people implement Tableau Server, which again is a product that I love. I've been at Tableau Server about 5 years. And that's all I have to say for now, so I'm going to hand it back over to Blake.
Fantastic. As you may have gathered, today's session is specifically geared towards those of you who are or soon will be or are contemplating or are dreading, hopefully not dreading, but maybe, dreading becoming a Tableau Server admin, and you may not necessarily be an IT pro. So basically what we're going to be covering today, there's a lot of content, and past experience tells us that Q&A is usually the most helpful amount of time, the most helpful section of the talk. So we're going to stay at fairly overview level and go relatively quickly so we can leave good. We're going to try to leave like 20-ish minutes for Q&A at the end to answer whatever you guys have. And in fact, we've got one of the gentlemen from our docs team in the back, and then one of our staff engineers in the room as well who I've worked with for a very long time. So we got the brain power in here to take care of whatever you guys need. All right, so without further ado, I already talked about that. Agenda slides, I don't like them very much, so that's all the time we're going to spend right here. So deploying Tableau Server, first things first, let's talk about your options. There are basically three flavors that you can roll with. We've got Tableau Server in general. I'm going to talk about Tableau Server, and Tableau Online is two different products. So they are, there's basically the exact same thing, but on-prem and in cloud. So with Tableau Server, you've got deployments in-house on your own hardware, on your own VMs. You've got Tableau Server deployed in the cloud, either through AWS, Azure, Google, one way or the other. And then you've got Tableau Online. It's hosted entirely by us. So the question becomes, whoa, what's going on? Hang on. Timings are running away on me. Okay. Let's try this again. So basically, how do you choose? You've got all these different potential ways to go, different advantages, disadvantages. Which one's right for you? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. So what to consider? The first two things. So are you seeing all three? Boy, Excel. PowerPoint is not being my friend. Anyway, so how do you figure out what to do? The first two things go hand in hand. You've got control and administration overhead. Basically, the more control that you want, the more administration overhead that you need. You've got, when you're deploying Tableau Server in-house on your own hardware, you've got to go and take care of both you've got full control over the system, you've got full control of the app, the data, all of that, but you're also responsible for the physical hardware you're running on. If your hard drive decides that it doesn't want to be your friend anymore and catches fire, you've got to take care of that. If it's sitting in your data center, something goes wrong there, that's on you or your staff or your company. If it's up in the cloud, if you decide you're going to deploy on Azure or AWS or Google, then you've got complete control of the application and full control of its configuration, but you don't have to worry at all about the hardware. If you go with Tableau Online, then all you really need to worry about is content and users and that license setup, and you don't have to sweat really any of the other hard stuff because that's all on our team taking that off your shoulders for you. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next piece. Another thing to think about is whether you need guest access. Who here is familiar with what the guest user is? Yeah? All right. So for those of you who aren't, the guest user is it's basically, think of it as an unauthenticated user. It's a user that doesn't have a license, and they're able to go and access embedded visualizations. A lot of times they get used in customer portals. If you've got it embedded in your website or, say, SharePoint or your wiki, and you need to share something fairly broadly. Like for one use case potentially inside Tableau would be that we've got dashboards that show some of our bug burn down work. For example, we might go and have guest user set up so people can get in. They don't necessarily have to log in. Granted, we've got all the licenses we could possibly want for our own product, but I've talked to plenty of customers over the years that use that use case. Is it quick? Because otherwise I like to save it to the end. No, it is one account, but you don't have to assign it to anybody. It's a function of your license, and there's a configuration option on the site level where you can flip it on or off. That basically would say, if you're unauthenticated and it's an embedded viz, I can see it. So, does that help? Okay. Alrighty. Really, so anyway, getting back to guest. Tableau Server in-house and in the cloud. This is specific to Tableau Server. Tableau Online does not have a concept of guest. But it's, in a lot of cases, that's, again, it's another factor to think of. Sorry here, folks. The slides getting out of order kind of threw me off. Give me a moment.
You covered all
I did? Yep.
Yeah.
Looks like I get it all. Cool. Yay for notes. Okay. Right, so the next thing to consider is the location of your data and your freshness requirements. Do you need live data? Then you're going to want to use Tableau Server. If you just need extracts, then you can use Tableau Online. Though, as we heard Ashley mention this morning, soon that difference is going to be going away as well, and you'll be able to get live data in Tableau Online just like you could in Tableau Server. One of the main differences that we have today is that Tableau Server is your only option if all of your data sources live inside your company. They're not cloud-based data sources, and you need the data to be live and fresh as opposed to extracts. Tableau Online deals primarily in extracts, except for some of the web-based data sources like Redshift and some of the others that are all web-based. You can get to that through Online. All right, and then the next piece to think about is, all right, user account management and authentication mechanism. Now, these two things I'm going to talk about, they're related, but I'm going to talk about them separately. So user account management. What we're talking about here is the system or the place where the user account, all that user data is stored. It's basically their username, their password, all of that. Do they live inside Tableau Server, which is the local option? All those credentials are all stored in the Tableau Server internal database, or in something like Active Directory, which I imagine most of you guys probably have within your companies. So those are both options that are supported by Tableau Server. Tableau Online has Tableau ID. And Tableau ID is basically the same thing as local. So it's credentials, all that is stored within Tableau Online. Now, this is different than authentication. Authentication is the process of verifying that a user is who they claim to be. So that usually involves username and password. It could be through, we have customers who use Tableau Server with, say, a thumbprint scanner, smart cards, SSL client certificates, that sort of thing. But as you can see, we've got a whole bunch of different authentication options. We've got local auth, there's Active Directory with automatic login. SSP with SAML. SAML is another one of those options that is also supported by Tableau Online. SAML's super standard. Lots of people are using it, a lot of different places. If you've used an app like OneLogin, that's a SAML provider, SSO solution. You sign in one place and you can pass that user context out to all the other apps. And recently we added OpenID Connect. We did that, I think, in 9.2. And Kerberos has been with us since 9.3. And we've also got Trusted Authentication, which is our own flavor of SAML, which is what we had before SAML. Really, basically the point that I want you guys to take away from this is that Tableau Server supports a whole bunch of different ways of getting in, and chances are that whatever mechanism your organization needs or your deployment requires, we can figure out a way to implement it and work together with it. Moving on. Here we go. Now, the next thing to think about is system resource considerations. How much power do you need? If you're leaning towards using a Tableau Server deployment as opposed to Tableau Online, you're going to need to figure out the amount of power. We've got a fantastic set of tech specs on our website. It's a great place to start. I think the requirements, what I have on there, 8 cores and 32 gigs of memory is the base requirement. Good place to start. That'll support usually up to about 100 users on a single node. If you need more than that, then you can go and scale out. You can add more hardware. We generally, actually I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but it makes sense to do so, so I will. There we go. Scaling is the other piece. But if you're going to go beyond 100 users, we usually recommend adding hardware and scaling up within a single node before you add more and scale out. Talking about hardware and CPUs, generally if you're going to use cloud VMs, that's VMs within Azure or AWS or Google Compute, you generally need to expect that you're going to require twice as many virtual CPUs on the virtual machines in the cloud as you will physical to get the same amount of performance from it. But if you have any questions about that, you can talk to your account manager. We do this all the time. If you've got an 8-core license, there are ways we can work that out for you real easy. In fact, I think that's something we talked about last year at TC. So, yeah, basically that's it. Your needs are going to vary based on your use cases and what you end up doing, whether you're heavy extracts or not, whether it's mostly live, just all that detail. Whether you use data server or not, and that's another one of those things to think about is how you deploy. So the scaling, that's transitioning down there. I've already talked about scaling up within a single node before scaling out. Who knows what it means to scale up when I use that terminology? No? A few people? Okay. Scaling up and scaling out. Scaling up basically means you're going and you're adding capacity within a single physical computer. It's whatever your server is. You're adding memory, you're adding processors, you're adding disk space. Scaling out is increasing the size of your cluster, the number of computers in your Tableau server deployment. So does that make sense? Okay, cool. So when I say scaling up before scaling out, basically you're going to get better performance if you add hardware within a single node first before you go and start adding more nodes. And the beauty of that is that now when you're scaling up and you're adding more processes within that node, you end up with less crosstalk across the network. You end up with much better performance. Scaling out, so with capacity, when you start to hit that limit of your single node capabilities, and we've got white papers that talk about all that detail, so I'm not going to go into what those limits are. Also our documentation. If you guys haven't seen it, there's a document out there called, I think it's Tableau Server, I referenced it a little bit, but I think it's Everybody's Tableau Server Admin Guide that goes into all sorts of detail about scaling, what to think about, what the symptoms are for your deployment, to be able to tell when you're reaching the capacity of your cluster or your single node box and what to do about it, how to plan for capacity as it's coming up, the conversations to have with sales, all that. So it's all there. Generally, with Tableau Server 10, one of the things that was really nice about 10, we just pushed this out in the white paper, is that it now scales out nearly linearly with cluster size. Now, what it means to scale linearly basically means that you have every time you add a new node to the cluster, and by node, a node is another server or another machine in the collection of your Tableau Server deployment. Every node that you add has the potential to add the same amount of capacity as every node before it. So for example, if you've got 2 nodes in your cluster, or we'd recommend at least 3 if you're going to go out that way. If you've got 3 nodes in your cluster and you double it to 6, you've now doubled your capacity. If you've got 4 and you add 1, you've now added 25%. But basically, each node has the potential to go and add the same amount as the one before. And that's fantastic. I mean, in the past, earlier versions, it wasn't quite that way. Still scaled really well, but 10 is even better. So now we're straight line. And like I said, consult our documentation, talk to your sales consultants or account team. They can help you out with a lot of those details specific to your use case. And then we've got several TC16 breakout sessions. Some of them you may have already seen. Did any of you guys go to the, what was the one?
Tableau Server hands-on.
Yeah, there was a couple of different Tableau Server hands-on. There's one for AWS installs and setups. There's another hands-on that was just, I think, installing and setting up server for the first time. So really, really good content. We talked to most of those folks there to make sure we're all in alignment. And they've got some good stuff in their decks. So, all right. Time. Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. So my last slide, and then switching over to Kevin, and he's going to do a fun demo for you. Last slide. So now you've made a choice. You've considered all the options. You've looked at hardware. You've talked about licensing. You've figured out what some of your basic use cases are. How do you choose? You've made a choice. You're going to go with online. Now what? Well, this is when the fun part begins. With Tableau Online, you just go to that address right there, online.tableau.com, and you can be up and running in a few minutes. You sign up right there, plug in your email address, all that, we'll give you a site, and you just get going. With Tableau Server, there's a few more questions, a few more things you're going to need to figure out. Again, you've got to figure out where you're going to install it, which authentication mechanism you're going to use. This is all stuff that's fairly simple, but because this is part of that additional administration overhead that you're going to take on when you're installing on your own environment. Figure these things out, then you can just download the installer, run it, and server can be up and running in as little as, say, 20 minutes. I do this on a regular basis on my team, so multiple times a day. But anyway, that's basically it. Kevin?
All right.
Turn over to you.
Okay. So bear with me for just a moment while I get over to our great fun demo here. And I'm just going to do this, and then that, and then this is going to go away because we're going to show you something else. As soon as I can see what I want to see here. Okay.
There you go.
Give me 1 sec.
And swipe.
Yeah, swipe. Oh, I have to pull it out of that.
Apologies. There we go.
Oh, and that's not scaling very well. Okay, hold on. I'll do this.
Sorry about
We'll
this,
start
folks.
here. Okay. So we've talked about all the things you want to consider. Is it showing what?
I was just going to ask, are you guys able to read that? It looks kind of small to me. Is it all right?
I
Okay.
have to do this. Okay. So Blake's told you that there's a lot of different things you need to consider, and then you're going to have to make a choice. So today what I've done is I've gone ahead and made a choice that I'm going to use one of the easiest ways to get Tableau Server up and going in your organization, especially if you're already AWS customers. AWS EC2 is a cloud-hosted virtual machine environment. We have basically a one-click installer available through the Amazon Marketplace. This one is called Tableau Server BYOL. That means bring your own license. So if you've already purchased Tableau Server, you're going to be able to apply your license to this. From here, basically, all you need to do is select a region. You're going to hit continue. It's going to spin up your instance. Now, for the sake of time and like a magic cooking show, I've already baked one in the oven. So, because it takes about 10 to 15 minutes the first time you start it up. And I don't really want to wait for that. So we can see that I do have a running instance. And so I'm going to pop over there to my Tableau server. And is this too small for you folks, or is this okay? Okay. It's not ideal, but we'll live with it. So the first time you log into Tableau Server after launching it in your AWS EC2 is you're going to want to activate your system. Now, again, since I've already baked this one, I didn't want to have it all load up and we'd wait a long time and then we wouldn't get time for questions at the end, which I'm sure you're going to have a lot of. So I've activated my product. From there, this is going to go away. It's going to successfully activate. The next screen you're going to see is this really intimidating Tableau Server configuration window. Here's the thing. Everything in here are sane defaults. You don't even need to worry about any of these for the time being. By the time that you've gone through documentation and you've made all these decisions, you'll probably have learned about a lot of these things anyways. But for the most part, they don't really matter. By default, we're going to run as, so when I say a run as user, that's like a service account. That means that's the account that the software is running as. By default, we run as this NT Authority network service. It's a built-in Windows account for network services. Of course, now in AWS, with this one-click install, we are limited to local authentication. Now, that doesn't mean you can't plug your SAML in later. All you need for your SAML to work in that scenario is that the username should match the username. Great. And again, our default port, we're a web service. You don't need to change this. Now, if you do have an AWS deployment already, not of Tableau Server, but just in general, and you've got like an Active Directory domain set up in AWS, you can still use AWS, but you wouldn't want to use the one-click install. You'd want to go ahead and install it manually like if you were doing it on any other machine. Now, again, for the most part, I'm not going to deep dive into this configuration window. These are all, like I said, very sane defaults. I do want to just draw your attention to a couple things. We do have alerts and subscriptions. You've probably heard about some of that stuff this week so far. You can turn them on or off. You can specify what email server to use, things like that. To configure SSL, which is very important if you're going to be running this on the public internet, you want to make sure you're using an SSL certificate. Very easy to do. You're going to check this box, put in the directories for the SSL certificate, restart Tableau server, and you're going to be up and secure. Again, we've got the SAML, Kerberos. Those of you that have Kerberos know that you need it, I'm sure. Those of you that don't have Kerberos or probably don't know that you don't need it. If you're one of a handful of the worldwide SAP HANA customers, that's here too. And finally, OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect is actually a lot more common, even though you've probably never heard of it. If you ever use, for example, your Gmail account to log into a service that doesn't belong to Google, you just used OpenID Connect. So it's a web standard. If you're Google Apps users, this means that, yes, you can log in with your Gmail accounts. So I think that's pretty cool. OK. So from there, the next step is you're going to create a Tableau server admin. Now, I've already done that, so I'm going to go ahead and log in as that user, and hopefully this works. Yay. All right. So this is what you're going to see when you first log in. Maybe some of you have already seen this screen before. Maybe you've played with some of our machines at the kiosks. That's OK. So when you first log in, let's talk a little bit about now some really fun topics like data governance. And let's talk a little bit about organization and how we at Tableau use Tableau. So projects are containers for workbooks. Workbooks are containers for views and dashboards. And can everyone see this OK? I can make it a little bigger here. Whoa, not that big. Let's get rid of that and try. There we go. OK. So in Tableau, when I say data governance is your policy on how you govern your data. It's not a feature of Tableau. What it is, though, is something that we can impose on Tableau using our permission system. And so users in Tableau carry roles. So the default role for someone who wants to consume content is going to be an interactor. This is why we also call them interactor licenses. So you're going to assign a user a role like publisher or interactor or server admin who basically can do whatever they'd like. So what carries permissions then is content. And our content, essentially, you need to think of our permissions like an access list, because they're whitelist, not blacklist. It's like you're either on the list to get into the club or you don't even know that it exists. So let's take a real quick look at our permissions. So I'm going to get into this a different way so it actually shows up on the screen better. So for our permissions, what I've done is I've clicked into the default project. I've clicked this permissions tab. And now you can see that right now I have all users. And that's a meta group, by the way. It's not a group you can delete. It literally just means all users on your server. And you can see that they're set to be a publisher to this project. And then they've got a couple custom setups here. So let's take a look. And the first thing I like to do when configuring a Tableau server is remove this all users group from default. Why do I do that? Because if I do that, default is like a template for every other project you create. So if you really need that robust data governance, you want to manage your permissions from the top down. And the best way to do that is let's make sure all users never shows up again, because that's not a scenario we probably want to have. OK, so I'm just going to drop it down. And so let's talk really briefly about these. So viewer means they can view the project. It means they're on the list to see it and that they can get into it. Publisher, fairly self-evident. Project leader means basically that they own it. They can remove content from it. They can change content, move things around. In this scenario, we're going to say none. We don't need to say denied. Personally, I don't even know why this exists, because I don't want to actively deny things to people. I would rather prefer that they don't even see it if they don't have access. Saves me some time answering their questions. So for workbooks, same deal. Viewer. Viewer is really something that you shouldn't use. It's kind of like kiosk mode. It's look but don't touch. I don't use it. You shouldn't use it. It's there because it's a deprecated license type, and we still have people that do use it. So Interactor is your default. This is your standard user. Now, for your creators, for those of you using Tableau Desktop and publishing but are not administrators, you can either make them editors, but bear in mind that if I lock the permissions on this project and I set Bob in accounting to be able to edit on this project, but you don't want Bob in accounting to be able to edit, don't set him as editor, even if he's a publisher for another project. But this is a great way to foster collaboration. So again, though, here I'm going to say none. Data sources is pretty straightforward. You can either connect to the data sources or edit the data sources. And again, I'm going to say none. Now, this big button here turns scary and red, but that's OK. We're just going to go ahead and click delete because we just removed all permissions from this project. Now, the next thing I want to do, again, for data governance, I want to manage these things from the top down. Maybe I'm a healthcare organization, and I really need to make sure that this HIPAA-protected data is never going to be seen by the wrong eyes, and I don't want to have to rely on my desktop publishers to set permissions every time. OK, that's fine. We're going to click this gray lock button, and I'm going to lock these permissions to the project. That means that any workbook published to this project is going to have to obey these permissions. Then I'm just going to go ahead and click Save. Now, any project that I create after this one will start out with this permission set. So going to skip through a couple other things here real fast. Users, very straightforward. To add a user, click the big orange button. Same thing with groups. Click the big orange button. Now, if we were on Active Directory right now, if I clicked that button, I'd have actually two options. I'd be either to import an Active Directory group and all the users in it, or I could create a local group. So if you have a very well-organized Active Directory with access control lists and all kinds of great stuff like that, go ahead and just import the group. And you'll also at that time be able to choose what licensing level they're assigned. OK, schedules. Schedules allow you to either refresh an extract or send out a subscription. You can create them as often as every 15 minutes or as infrequently as once a month. So a lot of flexibility there. Now, if you have an extract that takes 4 hours to complete, please don't try to run it every 15 minutes. You're going to have a bad time. I don't know that it'll break anything, but it will never finish. There's also priorities and things in there, but again, I don't want to deep dive too much. I really just want to make you guys feel comfortable today and not intimidated by Tableau Server. So tasks, once you have an extract or a subscription scheduled, they will show up in tasks. Now, because I'm lazy, I didn't create any examples here. But they would show up under these. You can also remove them from here, and you have some options to like run them now, things like that. So for example, like if you took your Tableau server down to do like an upgrade, and then people go, oh, but we were supposed to get our subscription because it's the Friday report. Go ahead and just click that Run Now button. They'll get their email. Finally, for you administrators, this is a really important page. This is your server status page. What you want to see is all of these are green. If you see them with the busy signal, which is this one here, that's OK. That's normal. If you see them as passive, that means you're running a cluster, and you probably are well graduated beyond this topic today. If you see unlicensed, and you know that you've paid us and that you're current on your license, the first thing you can try to do is restart Tableau Server. If it's still unlicensed, that's a great reason to call support. Finally, if you see down, again, first try to restart your server. If it's still not working, that's what support's there for. Finally, and this is a little bit off screen, but we have this setting page. Not going to get into everything here, but I do want to call out a couple really awesome things. We have revision history, essentially versioning. And so you can actually disable this if you'd like to save storage space, though it's not taking a lot of storage space. Or alternatively, you can set it to unlimited. Or maybe you just don't really want to have to deal with that many revisions. So right now I've got it set to 25, but I can just come in here and set it to 5 and click Save, and then I can have no more than 5 versions. I've got some other options in here about managing users and allowing or disallowing web authoring and workbook performance recording, whether or not the iPad app can take offline snapshots of your dashboards. So lots of good stuff in here. Now, since I'm using the correct license type to have guest access, I can enable or disable guest access. Now, guest access, again, it's not a blanket authorization for any user to look at any piece of content. You have to add guests to the whitelist for the piece of content, or they're not going to be able to see it. And of course, you can also change your language and locale. So if you prefer British English and color to color, then you can change color to color, which isn't a joke that works when spoken aloud. Finally, I also like, this is something that's often missed. People go, what's this little I button? It's the information button. And so you can jump straight to our live documentation by clicking Server Help. If you search this box, that searches our live, real documentation on our website. You can also really easily get support by clicking the Support button. And finally, when you're getting support, if you're like, why are they asking me my version number? I don't know that. That's OK. Click About Tableau Server. We'll tell you your version number. OK. Favorites button works like any other favorites button. This is for alerts. As an admin, you may see these if you have an extract failure. So like, for example, if we can't talk to your database or invalid credentials, somebody publishes something without an embedded password, those will all show up in the alerts, and then you can take action on that. Again, we can take a look at our licenses. Finally, I want to talk a little bit, just really briefly, on sites, and then I'm going to get back to Blake here, because I'm sure that I'm using just as much time as I don't have. So sites on Tableau Server, much like VMs are slices, like virtual slices of a physical machine, a site is like virtualizing Tableau Server. Now, why would I want to do that? OK. Again, so let's say that I'm a hospital or a bank. I have sensitive data that has a sensitive audience. Maybe I want to make sure that there's no way that content can ever cross that line. What a site allows me to do is have one set of users that can be assigned to different sites. So I can have a user that's members of multiple sites, so like my exec team or my auditors, things like that. Then on the other hand, if I'm a hospital, I can have all my clinicians being able to work with HIPAA-protected data, but then keep all of finance and all those other people that shouldn't have access to patient records in another site. And there's no way content can traverse those. So it's a really great way to do that. Or if you're building a customer-facing application, maybe you're doing analysis for your external customers, using sites is a really great way to give them each their own space. OK, and with that, I should probably fix this presentation so Blake can get into his. And again, thanks for your patience on this. We will take questions at the end. I'm sure you're going to have some. Okay. Oh. Arrangement. Yeah, mirror displays. Okay. We're going to jump. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Cool. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. All right, so we've talked about, Kevin's just done a fantastic demo for you guys about how the basic features work, how to configure the app. We've talked about the basic questions and things you need to consider when you're deciding how you're going to deploy, which deployment option. Now we're going to talk very briefly about how to keep the lights on, how to keep the server running. Tableau Server is very, very good at keeping itself up and running. It does a lot of work behind the scenes to take care of problems when they occur, to just to maintain itself and handle things that go wrong in a way that you guys don't need to worry about it. It's one of the ways that we design the product. However, just like any car, or we're in Austin, so bicycles, there are certain amounts of maintenance that you need to do to keep things running smoothly. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And there's a couple of concepts that I want to introduce real quickly here. There's two pieces. There's going to be a maintenance strategy, and your maintenance strategy is effectively those disciplines, those things that you do to keep the server up and running. It's basic things that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then there's another concept here called disaster recovery. And your disaster recovery strategy is, what do you do when things go really, really, really wrong? How do you get your server back up and running? Those sorts of things, and we'll talk about that as well. Now, what's a maintenance strategy? There are several things that can go into it. Very basic, there's a category of things called regular maintenance, I call regular maintenance tasks. These are the things that Me and my team, on our QA team, we've got about a dozen different environments that we maintain for our dev org of all the different versions that we support and various flavors and tweaks and permutations. And these are things that we do all the time. So you've got your basic maintenance strategy. These are things like regular Tableau server backups. That is probably the most important thing, that if you were going to do one thing regularly or automate one thing with the batch file, again, we've got documentation that talks about how to do all this stuff very easily. I would recommend taking backups at least weekly, if not more often. Because these things, I can't tell you how many times when I was in support, I spent about 2 years supporting Tableau server, how many times that I'd get on a call with a customer who something had gone wrong. I mean, sometimes a memory stick went bad. Various things happen. And they couldn't recover because they didn't have a backup. They hadn't taken one. They didn't know how. And when that happens, you're kind of hosed. And it always made me sad as a support engineer when I had to tell the customer, I'm sorry, your server's gone. Like, you got to start from scratch. And that just really sucks. And I don't want you guys to have to deal with that pain. So you've got, anyway, going to go through this. We've got backups. We've got logs, archival, and cleanup. Again, these things can all be scripted together. The next piece is your regular monitoring task. These are things that you want to do daily. It's just basic, takes maybe 10 minutes of your time. Make sure you can log in, go to the status page, make sure all the processes are up and running. You're going to go through and load a viz, make sure that one of your vizzes is able to load. Just all that basic stuff. In fact, this is another one of those things that you can script pieces of it using this tool we have called tab command. We've got a bunch of things that we run nightly on our own environments that do a lot of that basic sanity checking. Then the other piece is that you're going to go and set up your email alerts. That's one of the first things that you're going to do when you do your configuration. And go through and you can take all those things, set a custom send to email address, and then set up an Outlook role to file, stuff it into a folder, and then check the folder, see if there's any alerts, if anything went wrong overnight. So that's one of the other pieces to do. And then for the folks who are, this is kind of the next step beyond the context of this class. We've got a set of advanced monitoring tools. Tabmon and Windows Event Viewer. Tabmon is the one that I would recommend taking a look at, especially once you really get into it. It's a fantastic open source tool. It's on our GitHub repository. You Google Tabmon, it'll pop up. It's got some fantastic performance counters. You don't necessarily need to use it all the time, but it can be a really good performance troubleshooting tool that our support team might clue you in on. All right, now moving on. How to prepare for disasters. One of the things, anything can happen. Really, it could be anything from data loss to power cord getting pulled out if it's a box under your desk that IT's given you because it's a spare, to hardware loss. Really, anything could happen. So how do you prepare? A lot of it, I got a bunch of things here and good suggestions to take a look at. But really, the main things are, again, taking backups, but keeping those backups off-site. Create some mechanism to get those things off of your machine. It could be onto maybe a network share at your office that goes and replicates that out and it gets backed up. Maybe you use Box or Dropbox or OneDrive or something internally to store data. That can be another fantastic mechanism to get that backup out there. So that's one thing to do. Make sure that the backup is readily accessible, because nothing sucks more than your server going down and needing to set up a new one, and you can't get to the backup to restore your data because it's just going to take you too long. If it happens to be on a thumb drive at home, that doesn't really help you when you're at the office, right? Or vice versa. Your team can't get to it. Then there's let me see if there's anything else here that's critical. No, there isn't. So basically, there's concepts here related to having multiple processes. If one process goes down, we can fail over to the other, and so forth. Again, that stuff's in the docs. And the other piece here, for you guys especially, I would highly recommend continuing your education. You're already doing that now, and that's amazing. One of the docs that we have, I talked about here, is Tableau Server, everybody's install guide. Go in and hail this thing. Go home, download it, read it on the plane, whatever. There's a ton of really fantastic content that honestly was a lot of my source material, Kevin and I's source material for our talk today. It's absolutely fantastic. I think it was published about maybe six or 7 months ago, and good stuff. Otherwise, we've got training videos, white papers, so on and so forth. If you haven't heard about it yet, we also have a specific community on our forum specifically for admins, and there's a lot of great content there as well. When I was a product manager, I used that community all the time to both be involved and get input on my features and whatnot. It's a lot of good folks. And then lastly, we've had a lot of great training options as well. In-house, talk to your account rep. We can send our training team in or one of our partners, and you guys can get a lot of the hands-on stuff that's specific to your use cases, both for you and even for your other Tableau users within your company too, not just for server admin stuff. And I think with that, oh yeah, the last piece here, when stuff does go really, really wrong, our support team is going to be your best friend. When you open a case, you can do it through the portal or our website. Give us as much data as you possibly can. With our team, with anything that's support related, as you probably already know, showing is better than telling. Give us as much information as you possibly can. Think about what would you need to know to solve whatever problem you've gotten from a user, and then give us all that same info. Great ideas here in the bullets. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Kevin to touch on upgrades.
All right. I promise this is the last little bit before we take some questions, really. I know this was a lot to get through, but like I said, we're really trying to arm you with some knowledge so that you can go back and not be intimidated by these things and look at Tableau Server with some confidence and say, yeah, I can handle this. So really quickly, maintenance releases and upgrades. Part of what you're paying for, part of what your organization is paying for, is maintenance and support and continued development of the product. And so a maintenance release, what is that? It's defect resolutions, it's performance enhancements, it's security updates. They come out roughly once a month, generally towards the end of the month. Generally around the third week of the month, you'll see a maintenance release. Now, how do you upgrade Tableau Server? Well, it's a long and arduous journey through the Gobi. No, it's not that at all. It's really simple. Download the software, double-click the installer, and it's literally going to walk you through everything else. So every update is cumulative. You don't need to do them in order. Gone are the days of, I need to install 9.1, and then 9.2, and then 9.3, and 9.4. No. If you're on 10.0.1 or 10.0.2, and that's that third number, that's the maintenance release. So the first two numbers, major, minor, maintenance. So that third number basically just means if, for example, today we're on 10.0.2, that's the second maintenance release of the 10.0 series. So anything that's caught in the wild, so if you filed a support case and something's broken and we go and fix it, it's going to go in that maintenance release as soon as we're able to fix it. Now, again, upgrading Tableau Server, very, very simple. It's literally just download, click, and you're going to hit next a couple times. It's going to take a backup of all your data. So even though you've gone and taken Blake's recommendation and backed up that data, we're going to go ahead and do that one more time just to make sure that we have a clean backup. From there, it's going to remove the old software components, install the new software components, and you're pretty much done. It's going to bring in all your content, and you're going to be back up and running again, generally in under an hour. Now, that process could take longer. So if you've got hundreds of gigabytes of data in your Tableau server, it's going to take time to back that up. But if you're all live connection or you've got insanely fast hardware, it's not going to take that long. Excuse me. When should we upgrade? Yesterday. Try to keep us up to date as possible. If you do have a support case, one of the first things they're going to ask is, what version are you on? And if you tell them a version that's 6 months out of date, they might say, well, we fixed that 4 months ago. So does that mean you need to upgrade every time we release? If you don't have time for that, and I know I don't have time for that, it's okay to skip every other version. We also have a release notes page. So if you look at the release notes page, and we've got an RSS feed for that to tell you when new versions are available. And that's going to link you to our release news page. And on that page, you can look and see all the different reasons why we put this out. So if you see something on there that might affect you, and you haven't upgraded in a while, upgrade. So really simple. And finally, with upgrades, yes, it can be intimidating the first time, especially when you're going from a major version. Like, let's say that you're on 9.3 and you want to upgrade to 10.1. That could be a little scary because you've never done that before. That's okay. We do offer complimentary upgrade assistance for single server installs. Mm-hmm. If you have a cluster, you don't get it for free, though. Okay, so we're just going to wrap up really quickly here, and then we'll take questions. Here's what we covered. I'm pretty sure you were all here, so you knew what we covered. So I'm not going to read every single one of these. We definitely want to say thank you. We have a bunch of supplemental content. By the way, this deck will be available for download.
Yes.
So you will be able to get this. So you don't have to have X-ray vision and somehow see that these are links and somehow discern that you can get them and write them down. You don't have to do that. You can download the deck. If you like this or if you didn't, give us a survey. Here's some related sessions. So there's a couple of great hands-on. There's also getting a hands-on with Tableau Server permissions. So for those of you that data governance is important and you want to do those things that you just saw me do with permissions, but you don't quite remember how I did them, check out the hands-on. And questions?
All right. So the way we're going to do this is we've got a couple of microphones. So great, you're already raising. Awesome. You guys, you're pro. Check, check. Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So we had, I think, you in the yellow, sir. Go ahead.
Are there any options on the initial config that you get one shot at and you can never update after the initial config?
Thank you. That is a fantastic question and actually something I meant to mention. The user store, whether it's doing local authentication or, local or Active Directory, it's right on that config page. That is one that is something you cannot change once you've done the install. You technically could go and, if you did a local install of server and then you decide you want to do Active Directory later, you could technically do the restore of the backup, but your user accounts are going to be all messed up. Run it. Oh yeah, absolutely. Run as user can and does. I mean, people change that all the time. So, sorry, the question on that one was, what about the run as user? Can that change after you do the install?
I'm new to Tableau server, and I'm running 9.2 in production. I've built out a test box running 9.2. Was going to upgrade to 10 about 2 weeks ago, but 10.1 came out. So back to your schedule, and again, I was thinking, every, what do you call the second one, minor release? Or maybe just picking every 3 months, telling my customer, look, every 3 months, I'm going to upgrade to whatever the current is then. That you mentioned that was monthly. Do you have any advice on, is my approach fine, valid, invalid, better idea?
Yeah, I mean, really, again, you're going to want to pay attention to the release notes page. If you're going to skip, like if you want to have your own cadence where you're going to say, you know what, we're only going to upgrade our Tableau server every other month or once a quarter, watch our release notes page, and watch out, like last year when there was the Heartbleed SSL vulnerability, which was a real big deal, we had to fix that, and we put out an emergency maintenance release, and that's one of those times where don't be afraid to break your own rule when you're going to upgrade. But is that approach valid? Yeah, absolutely, you can do that.
Yeah, we have plenty of customers who do.
Yeah.
Hello. I have a question about the default folder. Is there a way to remove the default folder on the sites?
The default project?
So the default folder is permanently there. However, if you're a system administrator and you strip all the permissions from it, you're the only one that's going to see it. So if a user doesn't have, if they're not on the list on a project to see things as a viewer, they don't even see that the project exists. Because again, I don't want them asking questions on why they don't have access to that.
And real quick, one thing I wanted to add about the permissions model. With Tableau Server content permissions, it's assume no unless yes. So if you don't have the permission for it, you can't see it.
Simple question. How do I communicate to all the users through generating a distribution list on email or a welcome splash screen?
So the question, if I understand, is you're trying to communicate to your users via Tableau Server, or you're wanting to push? You what? Sorry. Yeah, I mean, generally, I would just send it through, an email through like your distribution list and let them know that's happening. Alternatively, you can. This would be kind of funny. I've never seen it done, but as an administrator, you can set everybody's start page to the same thing. So you could create like a project or a workbook that says, I'm upgrading the server tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and then set it as their start page, and that'll get out to them. So. Yeah, so yeah, you can go back and just reset the start page later. Yeah, so yeah, there's no way to really communicate it through Tableau, not currently. It's an interesting feature idea to kind of give them notice through the application itself. Do you have a better idea? I didn't.
No, I don't, not at all. But it prompted something that I wanted to mention as well, is that in that same community forum, if you're familiar with all of our community, there are places where you can make feature suggestions and look through the list of what other people have suggested and upvote. We use that internally when people have ideas. We go to our own forum, our own ideas page, and we suggest that our customers do that too. So something like that would, that'd be good.
Now, if you embed Tableau Server inside your own internal portal or wiki site or intranet, you could absolutely put something around that. We have a full JavaScript API, so Tableau Server is really easy to embed in your other content inside your organization. So.
There are probably other sessions as well. I don't know if they're repeated or when they went, but there's a session I think called Hacking Server Like a Dev that I think one of the things they might talk about is how to customize some of the Chrome.
Yeah, that session for you they might be able to tell you how to do what you want to do.
So changing gears a little bit for me, of course, right as I was leaving to come here, I started having a bunch of extracts failing. And because I was coming here, I didn't want that to keep happening. So some of the workbooks I just overwrote. I changed the priority number. And then in some cases, I changed the refresh schedule. And that seems to have worked, but I don't know which worked. And I guess if I have a question in there, you kind of glossed over it, but I am curious about what that priority means. In my case, they all say 50, and it doesn't seem like I can change it. Is that important? Does it do anything?
Yeah, so priority basically changes their place in line. So it means that, so if I have 3 extracts scheduled for the same time, so let's say I've got 3 extracts scheduled for 3 p.m., and then, but I want one, I know one takes longer than the others if the other 2 are trying to run around the same time. I can set that to a higher priority so that it gets run first in line with the other 2 behind it, depending on their priority.
So I guess a quick follow-up. In my case, I'm just admin on a site within it, and I've got another level of admin running the actual server. So I don't know who else and what other workbooks are running at those same times. I just have to talk to them and sort of hash it out, I guess, huh?
Want to talk to your system administrator. They're also going to be able to see the exact reasons those extracts failed. They've got a view into that. Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, you'll want to poke them until they, and if they're not aware of that, there is a background task for refresh built-in visualization under the status page, but only system administrators can see that.
Got it. Thanks.
I think he was next.
Yeah, question regarding the Tableau server. So we implemented Tableau server 10.0 as a pilot group trying to expand, but architecture recommended a single node system, and then business worked out the deal. We are told it can support up to 1,000 users, but I saw your presentation saying it's 100 users for modest usage, so that concerns as admin.
So there's 2 different numbers that we talk about when we talk about Tableau server capacity. The number we were talking about was a rough approximation for concurrency on that size. So if you have 1,000 users, we generally estimate that your actual concurrency and what we've seen in the real world is about 10% of your total users. So if you have 1,000 users, generally that means your concurrency would be about 100 users. If you have 300 users, that's like 30. Everybody uses Tableau Server and Tableau visualizations a little differently, but it's important not to think of it like a website where everybody's hitting the same page at once. Instead, users tend to click on a view, it loads, they look at it, they might change a filter. While they're doing that, another user looks at it. So we measure concurrency almost like in kind of like for any given amount of time, there's different actions occurring that have different costs. And so for an 8-core machine with 32 gigs of RAM, generally the range that we've seen with workbooks ranging from very simple gets you, 100, 160 concurrent users. If you start to get into like moderate complexity, more calculations, more joins, then you're looking at 75 to 100 users. If you're getting very complex, you're probably looking at 50 to 75. And a lot of times it's at that point, okay, add more RAM, so double the RAM from 4 gigs per core to 8 gigs per core, so now you're at 64 gigs. That'll push your concurrency up. And then if you're still needing more concurrency, if people are saying, things are just taking a lot longer to load now, just start scaling up And then once you hit that point where you're like, okay, we're willing to buy a 16-core machine, but we don't want to start getting up into expensive territory and 32-core machines, then you can say, okay, let's get a second 16-core machine, or a third, or build like an HA setup, which is 3 nodes. Does that kind of answer your question? Is that?
Your first slide said 110% concurrent.
Oh,
Different than what you just said.
sounds like there was a typo on the slide then. Yeah, we're sure we're sure.
Sorry about that. Sorry for that. Yeah, 10%.
I'm going to take one more question from over here, then I'll come to the other side.
Okay, great. If the publishers are allowed to publish and schedule basically whenever they want, if you have a lot of reports running and a lot of big databases, how do you control that?
That's a really good question, and it is something that can be difficult depending on the scale of your organization and how many users we're talking about. The best way to do it is since you have control over the schedules that are actually available on the server, the users can't create schedules. So you can assign you can create the schedules that are acceptable to you and your organization and your DBA. In that case, well, a lot of times now we're talking about taking those data sources out of the user's hands and instead relying on a component in Tableau Server called Data Server, which is I can publish a single version of the truth, that data source, and then share it with users. So that way they're not duplicating extracts. Instead, I can have one extract that connects to different parts of the data. And then, so like, if I can have one extract for accounting, I can have an extract for sales and operations, things like that. And then I'm controlling which data sources they have access to, and then I'm controlling which schedules those run on. And then, so instead of connecting directly to the data in Tableau Desktop, the very first option for connecting to data to a server is Tableau Server. And so they can click on that, they'll get a list of all their available data sources.
Tack onto that. We also have this program called Tableau Drive. I think it's called the Drive program. You can talk to your account rep, and that specifically, that program it's a professional services sort of engagement, but it's specifically about helping create that, foster that community the community that you're looking for, where it's very grassroots. Your users are really driving a lot of it and building things up well. So that might be something to consider.
Yeah, just to clarify, Tableau Drive is not an application. It's a framework and methodology for scaling out and building a culture of analytics. And let's get some questions from over here.
I was pretty excited this morning to hear the announcement about Tableau Server coming from Linux, and I was just curious if you guys could give us any details on time frame or anything.
We're looking at 2017. I mean, it's kind of, yes, we're very much it's done when it's done company, and we can't put it out there until it's done and we're happy with the product.
I mean, end of year 2017.
I would suggest going down to the enterprise kiosk down in Expo 1, and most of the guys on the Linux team, the devs and the PMs are down there, so that you could ask them directly.
Yeah, and you can sample it right there. They've got it running on CentOS right there at the kiosk. So, if that gives you an idea of how close it is. So.
I think we have time for one more question.
Is there a way to print out a report of all the hosted data sources for on the Tableau server?
That's probably built in. Actually, there's two ways. There'd be one where you're talking about like the data server data sources. There's one way where you kind of look at each site. There's a list of data sources in the content. And it can tell you all that. But another way you could potentially do it is you could build a custom admin view that connects to the database to the internal database and build your own report that'll contain all that same information. Yeah. And Matt, there's a gentleman by the name of Matt Coles who's the admin for our own Alpo deployment. We call it Alpo dog fooding. Yeah. But he's got some pretty fantastic dashboards that do things like that too. So he's on the community. You could look for him there. In fact, he may even have a session today, this week.